11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
conquer problems that have not been won. Let this event be used to signify what can be done. So dream of peace and harmony for everyone. Men of endless parade, endless as the sky.
We're Jerry and Don Virima at the Lunar Lander exhibit in the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.
But in 1969, we lived in the Cape Kennedy area at the time men went to the moon. At that time, the area consisted of a number of small towns: Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, Cocoa, Merritt Island, Rockledge, and Titusville. There were no condos lining the Atlantic Ocean at that time, and in fact in the early morning one would have the beach all to themselves. It was very quiet and peaceful. We lived about 200 yards from the Atlantic Ocean in the city of Cape Canaveral. Taking a walk along here toward the Canaveral Ship Canal, one would often meet no one on the beach in the early morning, although that was quite a pleasant time when it was still relatively cool. One could enjoy the crashing of the waves. One could, over a period of time, see the way in which the waves would change the contour of the beach, especially when they came from the northeast. In fact, the house on the beach got washed away during some of these storms. Here you can see how deserted the beaches were. In fact, birds could even nest very near the sandy beach. Above the beach, one could find cactus and a wide variety of plants, including succulents. One could break these apart and take a taste of them, and they would actually capture the salty flavor of the seawater. Ghost crabs would dig holes into the beach, here doing a little housekeeping chores. One could find these crab holes up and down the beach, just around where the water line would be located. It's quite a broad, sandy beach along the Cape Canaveral Cocoa Beach area. The area above the sandy beach was filled with vegetation, rather pristine, from some yucca, and a wide variety of plants covered this area, undisturbed by development at this time. The Canaveral Pier has always served as a popular meeting place for surfers. One could catch some very good waves here. In fact, I even tried surfing one time. Stood up once, all the way to the beach. While there were some apartment buildings along the beach, there were no high-rises yet. Also, there were not restrictions on dredging canals, which allowed for a number of homes to be built on canals in the Cocoa Beach area, as well as Merritt Island. Many people have boats to get from the canals into the Banana River from Cocoa Beach. There were more stately looking homes out in the Cocoa area and along the Indian River toward Sharps. The efforts of a number of contractors were involved in the space program at the Kennedy Space Center. IBM, Chrysler, Boeing. Many of these had small offices in the area, and some had manufacturing plants. I worked for McDonnell-Douglas, located in Titusville area. While McDonnell-Douglas was involved in the space program, I worked for them in the Dragon anti-tank weapons program. We tested these missiles at the Cape. Banks contributed to the business. This is a glass bank with a restaurant on top. The Rio 8 Sunken Treasure Museum in Cape Canaveral contained treasure dredged up from ships in the Atlantic. A number of churches were located in the surrounding area, serving the many families living in the area and the visiting contractors. There were also a lot of franchise eateries throughout the area because there was, in addition to the families, quite a transient community which had come for various durations of time to work on projects at the Cape. Many of these people just came for a short term and rented a place to live while they worked at the Cape. Also, many of them worked uneven hours and long hours, and the many small eateries provided a place to get a quick snack at most any time. There are pleasure boats all over the surrounding area on canals, rivers, lakes, and the sea. The Indian River is really a salt water bay with connections to the Atlantic. So with all the water in the area, it's not surprising that there are a number of boats used for pleasure and fishing and even for races. There are also, in addition to the pleasure boats, there were also some working boats at the port of Cape Canaveral. And these boats would go out fishing into the Atlantic Ocean. There were boats for hire at the port to take groups of people deep sea fishing. The Canaveral Ship Canal was dredged to allow barges to come to the Cape Kennedy Space Center to deliver rocket sections and to allow tracking ships to be docked here. In fact, one could tell when a space shot would be coming up because the tracking ships would leave the port then. The port would also be a port of call for Navy destroyers visiting the area. This strip of water was the boundary between the city of Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center, where the Air Force test range was right in the background. During the 1960s, a number of launches were made from the Air Force test range. Minuteman missiles and submarines would serve the port here, and Polaris missiles would be launched from them. The area also served as a good viewing point for rocket launches by the local residents. Of course, to accommodate all the transient contractors down here, and which amounted to a number of single people, there was a wide range of nighttime entertainment. When my wife first arrived in the area, she saw all the bright lights as we drove in from the Orlando airport to the city of Cape Canaveral along the Bennett Causeway. And she thought it looked like quite a large city area, and she was quite excited. The rest of the time we lived there, she kept looking for the city that never was, except for the bright lights. She was disappointed to find out that there was no shopping mall in the surrounding area. In fact, we had to drive to Orlando to find the nearest mall. Old buildings along the scenic Indian River Drive are remnants of a quieter era. I used to drive along the Indian River from Cape Canaveral to Titusville for work, and it was a real pleasure. Never crowded and very beautiful. Make a beautiful low road to bicycle along. Fishing by net or pole is a popular pastime. And there's even fish to be caught this way. course, the Indian River is rather shallow, as can be seen from the length of these piers. Banana trees are found along the Indian River Drive. Bright flowers covered the vines of this tree. Personal service was available from the Tiny Sharps post office along the Indian River. And the postmistress kept the beautiful flower garden nearby. Large yucca plants could be found growing wild in many areas. Farther north on Merritt Island could be found groves of oranges, the famous Indian River fruit. In the late winter, azaleas could be seen blooming profusely. Earlier in the year, when the blossoms were out, the fragrance from these orange trees would be overwhelming. There were trails through the Florida jungle with Spanish moss hanging from many of the live oak trees and other trees. Palm fronds make good fans in the Florida heat. Fox Lake is located just outside of Titusville. Fox Lake drains into the St. Johns River, which is one of the few rivers that flows north, with an outlet near Jacksonville, Florida. One good way to visit the swamps and rivers of Florida is by kayak, although occasionally one can find water snakes traversing across the surface of the swamps. Most of the waters are quite clear. Kayaking can give you a different tropical experience in Florida. Time to relax on Fox Lake. Water hyacinths have spread throughout many of the Florida streams. Mrs. May McDonnell makes her living creating beautiful shell pictures. She contracts somebody to cut the shells in the manner she desires and glues them together on wood backgrounds. May McDonnell recounted that she had received a speeding ticket on the way to church one Sunday. She didn't want to be late. She lived in a small house just outside of Titusville, right along the Indian River. Titusville is the main entrance to the Kennedy Space Center. Causeways get one across the Indian River. The first building one sees is the headquarters building. While we were there, NASA had their 10th anniversary, and they had an open house to anyone that had a pass to the Cape area. They opened up all the complexes for the people working there. As you can see, there's a number of contractors that were involved in the space program. This is the Apollo capsule being readied in a space simulation vacuum chamber. And the next flight was the Apollo 8 flight being prepared for. The open house was held about a week after the successful mission of the Apollo 7. Here's the lunar lander being prepared. The vertical assembly building, at least at that time, was the largest building in the world by volume, with 130 million cubic feet. The bay in the building is 525 feet high, and the building covers 8 acres. This is where the Saturn V rocket was assembled in its various sections. A memorial stands dedicated to the original 7 astronauts. Gantries support rockets in their various stages of completion. Here is a rocket being prepared.
Enter the capsule, check their gear, and get ready for the countdown. Deep round
And
your
liquid
waves,
hydrogen
hold your breath and
for
watch
fuel.
the lights to see if systems all say go now. They'll sail the ship to places where before no men have gone. They'll do the things that other men when times it couldn't be done. They'll chase the moon and up merrily beyond the sun. Men of endless
Look inside the blockhouse shows controls for launching the rockets. Of course, the concrete protects the workers from any explosion. I believe this is Complex 37, which was used for launching the Saturn I rockets.
As the rocket starts its journey, a nation watches with a sense of pride to be in the dawning of an era. They'll sail the ship to places where before
Computers
no men
control the
have gone.
sequencing of events.
Things that other men when times it couldn't be done. They'll chase the moon
The wiring
and up
tunnel
merrily
indicates the
beyond
complexity of the launching.
Men of endless courage.
Since we lived only a few miles from the Air Force range, rockets would oftentimes go unannounced in the middle of the night, and we would rush to the window to look at them. Here's a communications satellite going up into space with a rocket. Now the liquid-powered rockets would go hover and go very slowly up into the air, whereas the solid rockets used in the Minuteman would go very rapidly. This lunar sample was cut from a rock picked up from the surface of the moon by the crew of Apollo 17.
These moon rocks are one memento of the voyage to the moon.
This film is our memento of the Cape Kennedy area at the time men went to the moon.